It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when Alex's life changed forever. The kind of day where everything feels normal, routine even. Just another day at school, a couple of hours spent playing video games, and the usual hanging out with friends at the corner diner. But that day would mark a pivotal moment in his life, a moment so unexpected that he would never look at the world, or his family, quite the same again. Alex was a 16-year-old high school sophomore, the kind of kid who had always found comfort in the ordinary. His world didn't revolve around the latest gadgets or expensive toys. He was perfectly content with his life, even though it was far from perfect. His father, Greg, worked long hours at a factory on the outskirts of town, and his mother had passed away when he was young. With his father working tirelessly to make ends meet, Alex grew up with very little in terms of material possessions. He didn't have the latest phone or the newest video game consoles that most of his friends boasted about. Instead, Alex made do with hand-me-downs, older phones, outdated game systems, and second-hand clothes. Yet, he never complained. He understood that his father's sacrifices were necessary, and it made him appreciate what little he had. But then came the phone. That morning, Alex had no idea that the day ahead would shake the foundation of everything he thought he knew about himself and his family. He had woken up groggy after a late-night study session, rubbing his eyes as he stumbled out of bed. He glanced at the clock and cursed under his breath, realizing he was running late. His dad had already left for work, as he always did. Greg's hours were long, and the job he worked was physically demanding, but he rarely complained. Despite his hard work, Greg had always made sure that Alex's needs were met. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough. As Alex threw on his clothes and grabbed a granola bar from the kitchen, his mind was focused on the usual things: a test in history class, an upcoming project for biology, and the usual after-school plans with his friends. Life was simple. Nothing ever really seemed to change. But when Alex returned home from school that afternoon, something felt different. He opened the door to their small house, expecting the familiar scent of canned soup and the sound of the television blaring in the living room. Instead, there was an unfamiliar quiet. The only noise came from the soft hum of the refrigerator. "Dad," Alex called out, but no answer came. He shrugged it off, assuming Greg was just in the backyard or out running errands. His dad didn't often take breaks during the day, but when he did, it was usually to take care of small things around the house. Alex tossed his backpack onto the couch and made his way to the kitchen to grab a snack. That's when he saw it. Sitting on the kitchen table was a small, unassuming box wrapped in plain brown paper. It was unlike anything Alex had ever seen before. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at it, unsure of what it could be. There was no card, no note, just the box. His mind raced. Was it some kind of mistake? Maybe it was a package for someone else. But the longer he looked at it, the more he felt a strange sense of anticipation. The box wasn't heavy, but it felt like it held the weight of something much more significant. He could feel the nerves beginning to settle in his stomach, a strange mix of excitement and confusion. The longer he stared, the more he began to convince himself that it was for him. There was no way it could be anything else. But who would send him something? And why in the middle of the week? His heart was pounding as he slowly approached the table. He didn't want to get his hopes up, but something inside told him this was important. He carefully peeled back the paper, revealing a sleek black box with the familiar white logo on the front. The Apple logo. Alex's breath caught in his throat. "No way," he whispered to himself. Could it be? Could this really be? He carefully opened the box, lifting the top with trembling hands. Inside was an object he could barely believe was real, a brand new iPhone. Not an old model, not a refurbished one. A brand new, pristine iPhone 14. The kind of phone that everyone at school talked about, the one his friends drooled over, the one that seemed so far out of reach for someone like him. But here it was, right in front of him. For a moment, Alex just stood there, staring at it, his mind racing. It didn't seem real. He felt a rush of disbelief, followed by a growing sense of excitement. This was the phone he had dreamed of, the phone he thought he would never own. But how? His father couldn't have afforded this. They had always been careful with money, and Greg had never mentioned buying anything like this. It just didn't add up. He sat down at the kitchen table, still holding the box, his hands shaking slightly. There had to be some mistake. Maybe his dad had won it in some sort of contest, or maybe it was a gift from one of his coworkers. No, that didn't make sense either. Greg had never mentioned anything like this before. And the more Alex thought about it, the more one thing stood out. The phone didn't seem like something Greg could have just won. This was something bigger, something more deliberate. Alex took a deep breath and picked up the phone, his fingers hovering over the power button. The screen lit up almost instantly, and as the iPhone's familiar startup sound echoed in the quiet house, Alex felt a strange wave of emotion wash over him. He'd never been one for flashy things, but this was different. This wasn't just a phone. It was a symbol of something greater. It represented hope, opportunity, and maybe even a better future. Before he could gather his thoughts, the front door creaked open. Greg stepped inside, his face tired from the long day at work. His eyes immediately locked onto the iPhone in Alex's hands, and for a brief moment, the two just stared at each other. Greg looked exhausted, but his eyes twinkled with something else, something Alex couldn't quite place. "Dad," Alex said, his voice unsteady. "Where did this come from?" Greg sighed and walked over to the table, sitting down across from Alex. He looked at the phone, then back at his son. "It's for you," he said softly. It's your gift. You've earned it." Alex's heart skipped a beat, and he felt a lump rise in his throat. "Earned it? But I don't understand. How could you afford this? You didn't have to." "Alex, listen," Greg interrupted, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been saving up for this for a long time. I know it's a lot, but you've worked hard. You're doing great in school, and I just wanted to do something special for you. I know we don't have much, but you deserve this." For a moment, Alex couldn't speak. He just stared at the phone, then back at his father. His mind was racing. How had his father done this? Greg worked hard, but it had never been easy for them. Every month was a struggle to pay bills, and Alex knew that sometimes his father went without so that he could have enough. The idea of Greg spending so much money on this phone, something so seemingly frivolous, seemed out of character. But as Alex looked into his father's tired eyes, he realized that this wasn't just about the phone. It was about something more. Greg's eyes softened as he continued. "I know it's a lot, but I want you to understand something, son. It's not about the phone itself. It's about you, about giving you the best chance I can. I may not have a lot, but I can give you this. I want you to have the things I never had, the things I couldn't give you before. You deserve that." The words hit Alex harder than he expected. This wasn't just a phone. This was a gift of sacrifice, of love. A love that Alex had always known, but now it felt more tangible than ever before. Alex sat there, staring at the iPhone, still trying to process everything. His mind was racing, filled with conflicting emotions. He couldn't believe what his dad had done for him. Greg had never been one to show much emotion, never one to give in to the pressures of materialism. He'd always kept a tight grip on their finances, making sure to save every penny for essentials. For Greg, buying something extravagant was out of the question. So when Alex first laid eyes on the phone, it felt like the world had tilted off its axis. It didn't make sense. And yet, here it was, in his hands, a symbol of everything Alex had wanted, but never dared to dream was possible. Greg sat quietly across from him, watching his son, knowing that the gesture had made an impact. He could see the question swirling in Alex's eyes, the shock and the hesitation. Greg had known it would take time for Alex to grasp the enormity of the gift. He wasn't one to buy things just for the sake of it. Every purchase, every expense, had always been carefully calculated. And now, the iPhone sat between them like a bridge, one that Alex was reluctant to cross. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Greg broke it. "I know you're confused, Alex. You don't have to say it. I can see it in your eyes. But just know, this is for you. It's a gift from me. I want you to have it." Alex looked up at his dad, struggling to find the words. "But why? Why go this far? You didn't have to do this, Dad. I didn't ask for a new phone. I'm happy with what I have. I don't need this," Alex said, his voice trailing off at the end. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the gesture. It was just so overwhelming, so outside of the norm that it left him feeling like he was caught in some sort of dream he couldn't wake up from. Greg nodded slowly, his face a mix of pride and something deeper, something more vulnerable. "I know, son, but sometimes I just want to do something for you. You work hard, you study, you're a good kid. I know life's been tough, and maybe this phone seems like a small thing, but to me, it means a lot. You've earned it." Alex looked back at the phone, still unsure how to respond. The sleek, shiny surface of the iPhone gleamed under the kitchen light, its very existence a stark contrast to the small, modest home he'd grown up in. It felt like something out of place, like an intrusion into their simple, straightforward life. He had seen people with iPhones before, of course, friends at school, people in town, but it always seemed like something unattainable, something that existed in a different world, a world that was far from his own. And yet, here it was, within arm's reach, and he could hardly believe it. But as his fingers grazed the smooth surface, Alex couldn't ignore the small but insistent voice in his head that whispered doubts. Was this really what they needed right now? It wasn't like he didn't appreciate the gesture. It was just that this phone felt like an excess, a luxury, a product of a world that seemed so disconnected from the daily grind of his family's life. Greg seemed to sense his son's hesitation. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I know you're probably thinking about the cost," Greg said. "I know this isn't exactly what you would have picked. But sometimes, Alex, we need to take a step back and think about the bigger picture. You might not understand it now, but I want you to know that I did this because I believe in you. This isn't just about the phone. It's about you having the tools to build your future. I want you to have the chance to go places, to do things, to have the life I couldn't." Alex swallowed hard. His father's words hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't about the phone at all. It was about something deeper, something more profound. Greg wasn't just giving him an object. He was giving him a chance to rise above the life they had known, a chance to be something more than the sum of their struggles. But the weight of that gift, of that hope, was starting to feel heavier than Alex had expected. The reality of it was sinking in. This wasn't just some random gesture. This was his dad, who worked tirelessly to provide, stretching his resources to the limit to give his son a shot at a better life. It was a sacrifice, one that Alex hadn't truly grasped until now. It wasn't just the price of the phone. It was the cost of that hope, the cost of the love behind it. "I don't know what to say," Alex muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Greg smiled, a small, knowing smile that spoke volumes. "You don't have to say anything. Just remember that this is a gift from me to you. And if it helps, I hope it reminds you that you can do anything, that you can reach your dreams. Don't let anything stand in your way." Alex nodded, though he still felt unsure. As much as he wanted to appreciate the gift fully, there was a part of him that couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger, something he wasn't quite ready to understand. There was a lingering doubt in the back of his mind, a voice that kept asking whether this was the right move, whether his dad should have spent so much for a phone when there were other things to worry about. But before he could voice his concerns, his dad stood up, stretching his arms. "I'm going to go take care of some things," Greg said, his voice warm but tired. "You should check the phone out. I'll leave you to it." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving Alex alone with his thoughts and with the phone. Alex sat there in silence for a while, his hand still resting on the iPhone. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by a growing sense of awe. But that feeling was quickly tempered by guilt. He had seen his father work day after day, seen the exhaustion in his eyes, the wear and tear on his body. And yet he'd somehow found a way to buy this phone. It felt like an act of love, an act of sacrifice that Alex wasn't sure he deserved. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe his dad didn't see it that way. Maybe Gray hadn't bought the phone for Alex to feel indebted. Maybe he had simply bought it to show his son that he believed in him, that he wanted him to have the best chances possible. And in that moment, Alex made a decision. He wasn't going to let this gift become a source of guilt. He was going to make sure it meant something. He was going to make sure that the sacrifice his father had made wasn't in vain. With newfound determination, Alex picked up the iPhone again, this time with a sense of purpose. He turned it on, his fingers swiping across the screen as he began to explore its features. There were so many things he'd never had the opportunity to experience before. Things like the latest apps, high-quality photography, fast internet speeds. But it wasn't the phone that excited him the most. It was the idea that this gift, this unexpected, luxurious gesture, could be the beginning of something bigger. It could be the key to the future his father had dreamed of for him. As the phone loaded up, Alex knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let his dad's sacrifice go to waste. He was going to make the most of this. He was going to make it count. But even as he sat there, a sense of dread began to creep in. This gift, while it was incredible, came with its own set of expectations. Expectations that Alex wasn't sure he was ready for. What if he couldn't live up to them? What if, in trying to make his father proud, he made the wrong choices? What if everything he had hoped for was just a dream that would ultimately slip through his fingers? The questions were endless, but for now, Alex decided to push them aside. There would be time for answers later. For now, there was just the phone, and the chance to make something of it. He had a future to think about. And for the first time in his life, he felt like it might actually be within his grasp. And so, with the iPhone in hand, Alex took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. Little did he know that this seemingly small moment, this gift, would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The days following Alex's receipt of the iPhone were a whirlwind of emotions. His life, which had once been simple and predictable, was now full of questions, doubts, and an ever-growing sense of responsibility. The gift, which had seemed so extraordinary at first, was now the source of an internal struggle he couldn't shake off. He couldn't stop thinking about what it represented, what it meant for him and for his father. The more he reflected on it, the more overwhelmed he became. It wasn't just the phone itself that troubled Alex. It was everything it symbolized. The phone had come from his father's sacrifices, sacrifices that Alex knew would go unnoticed by the world. Gray had worked so hard, not just for the phone but for the life they had. Every day, Greg got up before dawn, worked long shifts at the factory, and came home exhausted. Alex had grown used to seeing his father tired but never complaining. Gray had always shielded him from the harsh realities of life, and now this extravagant gift felt like a heavy weight on Alex's shoulders. He had no idea how to accept it. He had no idea how to make it mean something. The phone wasn't just a gift. It was a message from his father about believing in him, about wanting to give him something that could help him succeed. It wasn't about the latest tech or keeping up with his friends. It was about giving him the tools to succeed. At least that's what Gray had said. But the more Alex thought about it, the more uncertain he became. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that responsibility. What if he failed? What if, by accepting this phone, He was setting himself up for failure. What if this gesture of love was really just a reminder of how much more he had to prove? The first real test came the following weekend, when Alex decided to go to the Apple Store. He had heard from friends that the new iPhones were incredibly fast and had an advanced camera system. He had no intention of going to get the phone fixed or to exchange it. That wasn't the issue. He just wanted to see if he could learn more about what made this phone so special, about what made it worth the sacrifice his father had made. Walking into the sleek, modern Apple Store felt surreal. The polished floors, the minimalistic design, and the gleaming displays, everything looked so expensive and pristine. Alex almost felt out of place. The workers, dressed in their black shirts with the iconic Apple logo, smiled as he entered, but it was a polite, professional smile. They didn't know him. They didn't know the story behind the phone he was holding in his hand. He approached one of the displays, pretending to browse, though in reality, his heart was pounding in his chest. He was hesitant, unsure of what to do, what to say. He wasn't there to buy anything. He wasn't there to make a big scene. He just wanted to understand this phone, this gift. What was so special about it? Why had his dad chosen this particular model? A young woman with short, dark hair walked up to him, her eyes lighting up when she saw the phone in his hand. "Nice choice," she said, smiling. "The new iPhone 14, huh? It's an amazing phone. How are you liking it?" Alex hesitated, looking down at the phone, the words barely coming to his lips. "Yeah, it's great. Just, getting used to it." The employee raised an eyebrow. "Just getting used to it? That's interesting. Most people are blown away by the camera alone." She gestured toward the display of iPhones on the counter. "But this model, it's got more than just a great camera. You've got the A16 Bionic chip, the ceramic shield screen, the 5G capabilities. It's a powerhouse." Alex nodded, trying to keep the conversation casual. But inside, his thoughts were racing. "Yeah, I've heard about the camera. It's supposed to be top-notch." The woman smiled, sensing his hesitation. "If you're interested, I can show you some of the features. Or, if you'd like, I can explain the full technical specs. You know, this phone is more than just a gadget. It's a tool. It's designed to make your life easier." The words hit Alex like a hammer. A tool. That's exactly what it was meant to be. But to him, it felt more like a symbol of all the things he had yet to accomplish. He didn't need a tool. He needed a plan, a strategy to figure out what he wanted in life. This phone, this amazing, powerful device, felt like an overwhelming weight on his shoulders. "Maybe later," Alex said, trying to brush it off. "I'm just still figuring things out." The woman nodded, understanding. "No problem. If you ever want help, we're here." As Alex walked away, the thought lingered in his mind. It's a tool. It wasn't just about the technology. It wasn't about the brand. It was about how the phone could be used, how it could help him. And suddenly, Alex realized just how much potential this phone represented. It wasn't just a toy or a luxury item. It was a key to a future he wasn't sure he was ready for. He left the store that day with more questions than answers. He had thought he was prepared for this moment, but now it felt like everything was changing faster than he could keep up with. The phone represented a turning point in his life, a shift in how he saw the world and his place in it. But the more he thought about it, the more the pressure built. Was he ready to live up to the expectations attached to this gift? What if he couldn't measure up? The next few days were a blur. Alex tried to act normal, tried to carry on with his routine, but it was impossible to ignore the growing tension within him. School was the same. His friends didn't know about the phone yet, but Alex could sense their curiosity. They had seen the old phone he'd been using, an outdated model that had barely worked. But now, with this brand new iPhone, things were bound to change. It wasn't that Alex didn't want to tell them. It was just that he didn't know how to explain it. How could he talk about this phone, this extravagant gift, when he wasn't even sure he deserved it. One afternoon after school, Alex was sitting on the front porch of his house, absent-mindedly scrolling through the iPhone. The screen was so sharp, so responsive, it almost felt like a dream. He couldn't help but marvel at it. The photos he took were crystal clear, the apps loaded instantly, and the performance was smooth. It was everything he had ever wanted, and more. He thought about his friends, the way they would react when they saw it. They would be impressed. No doubt about that. But as he sat there, a new thought crept into his mind. What if he had taken the wrong path? What if, by accepting this phone, he had somehow started down a road he wasn't prepared for? What if the expectations were too much? What if this phone became a reminder of everything he wasn't doing? He had always worked hard in school, but now, with this phone in his hands, the pressure felt unbearable. What if it wasn't just about the phone? What if it was about his whole future, and whether or not he could live up to it? That night, as Alex lay in bed, the weight of everything pressed down on him. The phone sat on his nightstand, glowing softly in the dark. It felt like a ticking time bomb, its silence deafening. And just like that, Alex made a decision. He needed to do something with it. He couldn't just let it sit there, collecting dust. This phone was a tool, his tool, and somehow he had to figure out how to use it, to make it count. The next morning, he woke up early. His father had already left for work as usual. Alex grabbed the phone, his mind set on finding a way to make this gift mean something, to make it a turning point in his life, not just a symbol of his father's sacrifice. It was time to stop letting it weigh him down. It was time to start making it work for him. And so, with renewed determination, Alex set off to make the most of this moment, the first real step into a future that, until now, had seemed like a far-off dream. Little did he know, this decision would set him on a path that would challenge him in ways he hadn't even begun to imagine. As the days passed, Alex began to settle into a new rhythm, one where the iPhone became both a tool and a constant reminder of the choices he had ahead of him. At first, everything about the phone felt like a luxury, a shiny object to show off, something to impress his friends and classmates. But as he spent more time with it, something began to shift. This device wasn't just for showing off or snapping pictures. It was a conduit to a future he had yet to fully define, but that seemed within reach now more than ever. Still, with every swipe, every new app he downloaded, the weight of his father's sacrifice loomed larger. Gray had given so much to make this gift possible, and Alex wasn't sure he was ready to live up to it. The first signs of the consequences of his new reality came unexpectedly. On a Saturday afternoon, Alex was sitting in his room, flipping through social media, when his phone buzzed with a message from his best friend, Nate. Nate had always been the loud, gregarious type, the one who thrived on attention and loved to be the center of it all. He'd always had the newest gadgets, the trendiest clothes, and an uncanny ability to get what he wanted. They had been friends since middle school, and although Alex wasn't as flashy as Nate, he had always respected him for his confidence, even if it sometimes made Alex feel a little small. "Yo, is that the new iPhone 14? I can't believe you got your hands on one, man." Nate's message flashed across the screen. "We need to hang out tonight. I gotta see it in person." Alex hesitated before typing a response. Part of him wanted to show off, to let Nate see the phone and bask in the praise that would inevitably come from his friends. But another part of him, the part that was starting to feel the weight of the responsibility this phone carried, hesitated. Nate had always been the type to push Alex to do things, and Alex often found himself caught in the middle of Nate's desires and his own reservations. The last thing Alex wanted was to be the subject of a group's admiration based solely on the phone he'd been given, not on his merits. But on the other hand, wasn't this part of the deal? This phone was supposed to represent success, potential, a future. It was supposed to be something to strive for, something to live up to. Yet, in this moment, Alex wasn't sure if he was ready to take that leap. He typed back a simple message. "Yeah, "I've got it, but I'm not sure I want to show it off tonight." Nate's response came quickly. "What? Dude, you've got a brand new iPhone, and you're not gonna show it off? That's insane. Simon, let's hit the mall, grab some food, show it off. It's the perfect night for it." Alex couldn't help but feel the tug of Nate's influence. He could already imagine the way Nate would hype him up, the way their friends would gather around and congratulate him on his new possession. It wasn't just about the phone. It was about the image it projected. But was that really why Greg had bought it for him? To turn him into just another guy with the latest tech, something that defined him? Alex wasn't sure. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this phone wasn't just a status symbol. It was a reflection of his family's sacrifice, of his father's hope that he would make something of himself. He could feel the internal conflict building. Nate was right. It was the perfect night for it. He would look cool. He would be the guy with the brand new iPhone, something that most of his classmates could only dream of. But at what cost? Was he ready for the image that came with it? Would it mean something more than just showing off? The more Alex considered it, the more he felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. After some thought, he finally decided to decline. He wasn't ready to have his identity tied to the phone, to the status it could bring. He needed to figure out what it meant to him, beyond the material. He needed to understand how to use it as a tool for his future, not just a way to fit in. "I'm gonna pass tonight," Alex typed, his fingers pausing briefly before pressing send. Maybe another time. The weight of that decision seemed to lift immediately, though it was quickly replaced by a new set of worries. What would his friends think? What if they thought he was weird or too good for them? But in that moment, Alex knew that his hesitation had been the right choice. The phone wasn't just for showing off, it was for something bigger. The next few days passed with a strange quietness that Alex hadn't expected. Without the social validation that came from showing off the iPhone, he found himself alone with his thoughts more than ever. His father continued to work long hours, leaving Alex to reflect on everything that had happened since he received the gift. His classmates, especially Nate, had been quiet about the phone, not pushing him to flaunt it as they had in the beginning. They seemed to respect his decision, though Alex couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else at play, something deeper. It wasn't until the following Thursday that Alex's world truly began to shift. It started with a seemingly mundane event, a simple trip to the store. Greg had asked Alex to pick up a few things for dinner on his way home from school. Alex had always been the one to run errands when Greg was working, a small responsibility that had long felt like part of his daily routine. But on this particular trip, something happened that Alex couldn't have anticipated. As he stood in line at the checkout, his eyes caught sight of a familiar face. It was Rachel, a girl from his biology class, the one who had always sat 2 rows ahead of him, but who he'd never really spoken to. She had an air of confidence that Alex admired but never thought he could connect with. Rachel was everything he wasn't: outgoing, popular, and seemingly always surrounded by friends. But there she was, standing in line just a few feet away, her eyes scanning the shelves while she waited to pay. Alex hesitated. He wasn't sure why he was so nervous. It wasn't like they were strangers. They'd had a few passing conversations in class, and he'd noticed the way she had smiled at him when they worked on group projects together. But in this moment, in the fluorescent-lit store, standing there in the middle of an ordinary task, Alex felt his nerves fray. He had always been the quiet one, the type of guy who stayed in the background, watching others. Talking to Rachel, especially now with the phone in his pocket, felt like stepping into an unfamiliar territory. Rachel, noticing him standing there, smiled warmly. "Hey, Alex," she said, her voice casual but friendly. "Hey," Alex replied, his heart suddenly racing. She raised an eyebrow as if noticing his hesitation. "You okay? You look a little off." Alex wasn't sure how to respond. He didn't want to mention the phone yet, not in front of Rachel. It felt too personal, too much like he was trying to impress her. Instead, He just nodded. "I'm good," Alex said, trying to act casual. "Just picking up some stuff for dinner." "Oh, cool," Rachel replied, her tone light. "Same here. I'm just getting some snacks for my study session later. Big test tomorrow." She paused before adding with a playful grin, "You're going to ace it, right?" Alex chuckled awkwardly, his nerves still palpable. "I hope so. You know how it is." They both stood there for a moment, the silence growing heavier. Alex could feel the pull of the phone in his pocket. He didn't want to be seen as just a guy with a new iPhone. He didn't want Rachel to think that's what defined him. Yet he also felt the weight of his father's gift, that hope and expectation. Was this the moment to finally embrace it? To show Rachel what his father had given him? Before Alex could make up his mind, Rachel broke the silence. "You know, I've been meaning to ask you something," she said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I'd noticed you've been more focused lately. You're not like the other guys. You're smart, you work hard, but you don't try to show off. I respect that. It's rare." Alex blinked, taken aback by her words. He had always thought of himself as invisible in comparison to others, especially people like Rachel, people who had the confidence to be bold, to stand out. But hearing her say this made him feel different, made him feel like he mattered in a way he hadn't considered before. "Thanks," Alex said, his voice steady, but with a hint of gratitude. "I guess I'm just trying to figure things out." Rachel smiled. "You're doing fine. More than fine, actually. Just don't let anyone tell you who you should be, okay? You're on the right track." Alex smiled, the warmth of her words sinking in. In that moment, he realized that maybe it wasn't about the phone, or the pressure to live up to expectations. Maybe it was about trusting himself, trusting his journey. The phone was just a tool, just a means to an end. It wasn't who he was, and for the first time in a long while, Alex felt like he was starting to understand that. After Rachel left, Alex stood there for a few moments, processing the following weeks brought about a shift in Alex's mindset that he had never expected. The struggle he had felt after receiving the phone began to recede into something far more profound, a realization that what mattered wasn't the gift itself, but how he chose to use it. The feeling of pressure that had once weighed so heavily on his shoulders began to dissipate, replaced by a new sense of clarity. The more he thought about his dad's sacrifice, the more he understood that the iPhone wasn't just a luxury. It was a bridge, one that connected his past to his future, his family's struggles to his potential successes. It was a tool, yes, but more importantly, it was a reminder of what his father had worked so hard to give him. With that understanding came the realization that he had to make this phone matter, not for his father, not for his friends, but for himself. It wasn't about showing it off or trying to impress anyone. It wasn't about making up for the things he felt he lacked. It was about using the opportunity it represented to carve a path forward. Alex began to approach his daily life with a new sense of purpose. The phone had been an unexpected catalyst for change. It wasn't the flashy gadget he had once seen it as. It was a reflection of something deeper. It became his way of staying organized, of focusing on the things that mattered. He downloaded apps that helped him stay on top of schoolwork, set reminders for important deadlines, and even started using it to document his thoughts and reflections. He created a digital journal, something he had always wanted to do, but never knew how to begin. The phone became a platform for self-improvement, not just a flashy device for entertainment. School was where the changes began to feel most noticeable. Alex had always been a diligent student, but the iPhone helped him take his academic life to the next level. He set goals for himself, not just in terms of grades, but in terms of his overall growth. The ability to organize his notes, schedule, and study plans on the phone made a difference in how efficiently he worked. But the true breakthrough came when he realized something even more important. His outlook on the future was changing. He wasn't just studying to get through school. He was studying to build a future where he could take control of his life and steer it in the direction he wanted. It wasn't about escaping his circumstances. It was about using them to propel himself forward. Despite all of this, a part of Alex still felt uncertain. He had taken ownership of his new responsibilities, but with that came an unsettling question. What was his future really going to look like? The pressure to succeed, something that had always been in the background, began to intensify. His father had worked so hard, had sacrificed so much, and Alex wasn't sure if he was truly ready to honor that sacrifice. He knew the stakes were high, but he still didn't fully understand what success meant for him. One evening, as Alex sat in his room, the weight of this uncertainty crept up on him. The iPhone sat on his desk, charging. He had been using it to study for his upcoming exams, trying to prepare himself for the future. But there was still a nagging feeling that something was missing. He had been following the plan, checking off boxes, grades, assignments, extracurricular activities, but he didn't feel like he was truly moving forward. It wasn't just about what he did. It was about why he did it. And for the first time, Alex realized that he didn't know why he was chasing success. His father had given him the iPhone to set him up for success, but Alex had never been shown what success truly looked like. His dad had never been the type to share his own dreams or goals. Greg had always worked quietly, never asking for anything in return. He had always focused on providing, on making sure Alex had what he needed. But Alex needed more than just material things. He needed direction. He needed to know what he was supposed to be working toward. Without that, everything he did felt empty. The next day after school, Alex decided to visit his father at work. It was something he had never done before. Greg's factory job had always been a point of quiet pride for him, something that Alex respected but didn't fully understand. Greg had always been the kind of person who did the hard work without asking for recognition. But Alex realized that it was time to have a conversation, not just about the phone or his schoolwork, but about the future, about what it meant to build a life, about the meaning of success. When Alex arrived at the factory, it wasn't the clean, polished environment he had imagined. The building was large, its metal walls worn with age, and the air was thick with the hum of machinery. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, neat home Alex had grown up in, but it was familiar. It was where his father spent most of his waking hours, working long shifts to provide for them. Alex had never fully understood why his father had chosen this life, or if he even liked it. But now he needed to understand. He needed to hear it from Greg himself. As he walked through the factory, Alex finally spotted his dad near a machine in the back, working on a piece of equipment. Greg looked up when he saw Alex approaching, and his face broke into a tired but genuine smile. "Hey, son, what brings you here?" Greg asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Alex stood still for a moment, unsure how to begin. There were so many things he wanted to say, but the words weren't coming easily. Finally, he spoke. "Dad, can we talk? I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next." Greg raised an eyebrow, but nodded, signaling Alex to follow him to the small break room. As they sat down at the table, Greg leaned forward, sensing the seriousness in his son's tone. "What's on your mind?" Greg asked. Alex hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't really know what I'm doing, Dad. I've been using the phone, organizing my life, studying, and all that. But it feels like I'm just going through the motions. I don't know what I'm working toward. I don't know what success really means. It's like I'm trying to do everything right, but I'm not sure if it's enough, if it matters." Greg sat back, looking at Alex with a kind of understanding that only a parent could possess. For a moment, he didn't speak, just listened. Then, slowly, he spoke. "Alex, I never really told you what success looks like to me," Greg said. "I've always worked hard to give you what I didn't have. But that doesn't mean you have to follow the same path. I don't want you to just work for the sake of working. I want you to find something that makes you happy. Success isn't about a phone, or a job, or a title. It's about finding meaning in what you do. It's about waking up every day knowing that you're doing something that matters. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Alex listened, the weight of his father's words sinking in. But I don't know what that is yet, he admitted. That's okay, Greg replied with a chuckle. Most people don't, but you've got time. And if you keep working hard, keep being honest with yourself, you'll find it. Just don't get too caught up in the idea of what success should look like. Make your own path. You don't need to measure up to anyone else's standards. For the first time in a long while, Alex felt a sense of relief wash over him. His father's words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that Alex had been desperately seeking. Success wasn't about the phone. It wasn't about meeting expectations or following someone else's script. It was about finding his own way, his own purpose. With newfound clarity, Alex returned home that evening, the phone in his pocket no longer feeling like a burden but like a tool. Something that could help him build the life he wanted, not one that was dictated by others. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. And he knew that, no matter what came next, he wouldn't have to walk the path alone. He had his father's support, and he had the drive to create a future that was uniquely his. The months that followed Alex's conversation with his father marked a profound turning point in his life. It wasn't that everything suddenly fell into place, or that he had everything figured out, but something within him shifted. The weight of expectations, the burden of having to live up to the iPhone, to his father's sacrifice, began to dissipate. It wasn't about what others thought anymore, and it certainly wasn't about the phone. It was about finding his own path, making decisions for himself, and figuring out what truly mattered. He stopped letting the pressure of his father's gift dictate how he lived and started using it as the tool it was meant to be, a tool for creating his future. Alex's newfound clarity didn't happen overnight. It came slowly, in small, incremental steps, and often through moments of reflection that caught him off guard. One evening, just after dinner, he sat down in the living room to organize his thoughts. He had a notebook in front of him, full of scribbled notes, half-formed ideas, and rough plans. He had started setting goals for himself, both academic and personal, and was using the phone to help him stay on track. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It wasn't about anyone's expectations but his own. It was about doing things that felt right to him. The days seemed to blend together, filled with schoolwork, personal projects, and the occasional conversation with his dad. Greg's hours at the factory had only increased, and he was often too tired to talk much at the end of the day, but there was a quiet understanding between them. Alex was learning how to use his time wisely, balancing school, work, and his own aspirations. He wasn't overwhelmed anymore. He was focused. He was beginning to see how all the pieces could fit together. It wasn't until the spring of that year that everything truly came to a head. Alex had just finished his midterms and, as usual, had buried himself in study material for weeks. The routine had become second nature, but something inside him told him that he needed to break out of his comfort zone. He had begun researching career options and looking into colleges, things that had always seemed distant but were now tangible goals. He wasn't just doing this for his father anymore, nor was he just doing it to meet some arbitrary standard. He was doing it for himself, to build a life that would give him the freedom and opportunities he had always wanted. One afternoon, as Alex was going through his phone, sorting through emails and calendars, he noticed a notification for a scholarship opportunity. It was for a summer internship program at a well-known tech company, something he had never imagined he would be eligible for. The internship promised real-world experience, exposure to the tech industry, and a chance to work with some of the brightest minds in the field. At first, Alex hesitated. The application was competitive, and he wasn't sure he stood a chance. He thought about how much time it would take away from his studies, about how unsure he still was about his future. But then he thought about his dad's words, about making his own path, not waiting for life to happen, but making it happen. He knew that this was his chance to prove something to himself. He took a deep breath and clicked on the application link. It felt like the most terrifying thing he had ever done. What if he didn't get in? What if it was all a waste of time? But as he started filling out the form, his thoughts shifted. He wasn't doing this to impress anyone. He wasn't doing it for validation. He was doing it because it felt like the right next step, the right opportunity for someone who was ready to take the plunge into the unknown. For the first time in a long while, Alex wasn't worrying about the consequences. He wasn't fixated on how things might turn out. He was living in the moment, taking the steps he needed to take. He completed the application, wrote the essay, and submitted it without overthinking every word. When he hit send, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't about whether he would get the internship. It was about the fact that he had taken the chance. Over the next several weeks, life returned to its familiar rhythm. Alex continued his studies, worked part-time at a local cafe, and kept pushing himself to learn more about his interests. His father's hours had remained long, and Greg had been too tired to engage in many deep conversations, but the bond between them had never been stronger. There was an unspoken understanding, a mutual respect for the work they were both doing, even if it wasn't always expressed in words. Then, one afternoon, just as Alex was getting ready to head out for his part-time job, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the tech company. His heart skipped a beat. He quickly opened the message, his eyes scanning the screen. The subject line was clear. "Congratulations on your internship application." For a moment, Alex couldn't believe it. His mind raced as he read the email, confirming that he had been selected for the summer internship. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was the beginning of something bigger. It was the realization that he had taken control of his future, that he was on the path toward something he had only dreamed of just a few months ago. He had done it. He sat down on the couch, staring at the email in disbelief. His heart was pounding in his chest. This wasn't just a scholarship or an internship. It was everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed for. It was the culmination of all the hours he had spent studying, the decisions he had made to push himself outside his comfort zone. And it was a reflection of his father's unwavering belief in him. When Greg came home later that evening, Alex could hardly contain his excitement. He had been sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand, when Greg walked in, looking tired but content. Without waiting for him to say anything, Alex blurted out the news. "I got it, Dad. The internship. I got the summer internship with the tech company." Greg stopped in his tracks, his tired eyes widening with surprise. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" Alex nodded, his voice shaking with emotion. "I'm serious. I applied a few weeks ago, and they accepted me. I'm going to work with them this summer." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Greg looked at Alex, his face softening with pride. "Son, I'm so proud of you. I didn't know you were applying, but I'm proud of you for taking that chance. You've worked hard, and it's paying off." Alex felt his heart swell. He had never seen his father so genuinely proud. It was a moment he would never forget, a moment where everything, his struggles, his sacrifices, his doubts, finally seemed to fall into place. Over the next few weeks, the excitement of the internship settled into a steady anticipation. Alex knew that the road ahead would be challenging. The internship would require long hours, intense work, and a steep learning curve. But he was ready. He was no longer the boy who had received an iPhone and felt overwhelmed by it. He was a young man who had taken responsibility for his future, who had worked hard and earned his place in the world. As the summer approached and Alex prepared for the internship, his relationship with his father deepened. They had conversations that had once seemed impossible. They talked about the future, about what success truly meant, and about the sacrifices that had been made. Greg, despite his exhaustion, had always known that Alex was destined for something greater. But now, Alex had begun to believe it too. He had stopped seeing his father's sacrifices as burdens and started seeing them as the foundation of his own success. The internship itself was everything Alex had hoped for and more. The work was intense, but it was also inspiring. He had the chance to learn from some of the brightest minds in the tech world, and for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. The skills he gained over that summer, technical skills, communication skills, problem-solving abilities, set him apart. By the time the internship ended, Alex had gained a new sense of confidence. He knew that his future was his to shape, and that the phone, his father's sacrifices, and everything else had simply been the beginning. As the summer drew to a close, Alex stood on the brink of a new chapter in his life. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he was eager to face it. The internship had given him the tools he needed to succeed, but it was his determination, his willingness to take risks, and his unwavering belief in himself that had made all the difference. As he looked back at the journey that had brought him here, starting with that unexpected gift, the iPhone, Alex realized that the most important thing he had learned was not about success, but about how to define it for himself. Success wasn't about the things he had or the opportunities he was given. It was about what he did with those opportunities, about how he chose to grow, to challenge himself, and to push forward. And in that moment, standing on the cusp of everything he had dreamed of, Alex knew that he was ready to define his own future, to carve his own path, and to honor the sacrifices that had gotten him there. It was a future full of promise, full of hope, and it was his to shape.